oldest girl, I didn't feel that anything was wrong as long as the girl went along with it. But then when I seen it was hurting the girl, I had stopped everything. And as with the youngest girl, now, as far as drowning, that was an accident.
There are some crimes so horrific, so deeply disturbing that they shake your faith in humanity itself. Crimes that leave no question as to whether the death penalty is justified, not out of vengeance, but because of the sheer magnitude of the evil committed. And today's case is exactly that. This is the story of a crime so vile, so brutally inhumane, that it has haunted a family and the state of Georgia for nearly 50 years. A case that, for many, represents precisely why the death penalty exists in the first place. Yet, the man responsible for one of the most grotesque and senseless acts imaginable remains on death row to this day. His execution delayed again and again, over and over. His victim was just 8 years old. Her family has waited almost half a century to see justice be carried out. Justice they were told would come when this man was sentenced to death. But instead of closure, they've endured decades of legal delays, appeals, and uncertainty. And now, they worry that the man who took their daughter's life in the most brutal way possible may ultimately die from natural causes, never actually facing the full consequence of his actions. They want to be there to see the man who destroyed their world, their lives, take his last final breath. But as time drags on, that day feels more and more uncertain. There are many who question the ethics of capital punishment, and that's valid. It's a deeply complicated issue, but when you hear the details of what happened to a young child in this case, and how Virgil Presnell took her life, it becomes painfully clear why this family feels the way that they do. The crime wasn't just murder, it was monstrous. And the system, slow, entangled in bureaucracy, seems to be failing them in real time. Because if a death sentence means sitting in prison for over 50 years, with no execution in sight, then is it really a death sentence at all? Or is it just life by another name? This is the tragic case of Lori Smith, an 8-year-old girl whose life was stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. And the man who admitted to killing her, who showed police where to find her body in the first place, is still alive today. There's no ambiguity here, no mystery, just a devastating truth and a long-delayed reckoning. Because one thing is certain, when your fate is sealed, there's no turning back. The gavel has fallen. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. Lori Ann Smith was born on September 26, 1967, in Cobb County, Georgia. She was your typical 8-year-old, full of joy, laughter, and an infectious zest for life. Described by her family as free-spirited and loving, Lori was the kind of child who lit up every room that she entered. Her older sister, Lisa, said Lori had a way of making friends wherever she went. She never met a stranger, her sister says. Lori was kind, curious, and remarkably brave for her age. And as you'll hear later, that bravery would become heartbreakingly clear in her final moments. In the spring of 1976, Lori was finishing up the school year at Richard B. Russell Elementary School in Smyrna, Georgia. It was early May, the weather was warming, the school year was winding down, and kids everywhere were buzzing with excitement for summer break. And Lori was no different. She had her whole life ahead of her, a life filled with possibility, dreams, and everything an 8-year-old should get to experience. But Lori would never see that summer. May 4th, 1976 began like any other ordinary school day, but it would end up in an unimaginable tragedy. After the final bell rang, students poured out of the building, chatting about their plans for the afternoon. Homework, playtime, dinner with family. Lori and her friend decided to walk home together after school, taking a wooded trail they often used as a shortcut. And this trail was a familiar path, one they had likely walked many times before. But what they didn't know was that someone had been watching them. A predator, a man whose name will come later, had been lurking near the school. He had been there the day before, observing children through his binoculars, studying them. He had already chosen a target, a 10-year-old girl, Lori's friend. But on that day, Lori was simply walking home with her. Wrong place, wrong time. And though no fault of her own, Lori became part of his twisted plan. And now let me be clear. This was no fault of these children. They were innocent. They were simply doing what kids do, walking home, trusting in the safety of their world. They couldn't have known they were being watched. They couldn't even probably have imagined the darkness that had its eyes locked onto them. But it's hard not to think about the what ifs. What if Lori had taken the bus that day? What if she had walked home alone? But those are questions without answers. And the truth is, she should have made it home. Both of them should have. They were just children, just little girls. And one of them, Lori, never even had the chance to grow up. She had dreams. She had a family who adored her. She had a life worth living. And in a matter of moments, all that was taken away, violently, senselessly, by someone who saw her not as a person, but as an opportunity to carry out his own twisted desires. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's about a little girl who never got to become who she was meant to be. And as Lori and her friend walked home from school that day, they decided to take a shortcut, that wooden trail that I had mentioned earlier. It was just a quicker way to get home. But what they didn't know was that someone was waiting for them in the shadows, watching them from the shadows. That man was 22-year-old Virgil Presnell Jr. He had been watching the area, carefully studying the children at the school. The day before, he had seen a 10-year-old girl, Lori's friend, and became fixated on her. And this time, he returned with a plan. He knew what he wanted, and nothing was going to stop him. Virgil hid along the trail, positioning himself where that he wouldn't have been seen. He was unemployed, a high school dropout, and living with his mother in a Northwest Atlanta apartment on Hollywood Road, not far from the very spot where the girls were walking. As Lori and her friend made their way down the trail, Virgil ambushed them. He forced both girls into his blue Plymouth Duster, taped their mouths shut, and threatened to kill them if they didn't do exactly what he said. It was sudden, violent, and terrifying. But this wasn't his first attempt. Just about a week and a half earlier, Virgil had tried to abduct another 10-year-old girl while she was walking home from school as well. Same old story. He grabbed her, threatened her with a knife, but she was able to escape. And unfortunately, this failed attempt didn't deter him. If anything, it pushed him to be more calculated. So when he saw this new girl walking alongside Lori, he made sure he was ready this time. The day before the attack, he gathered everything he thought he would need: a gun, a knife, a rug from his apartment, and a jar of lubricant. He prepared his car and returned to the trail, fully intent on following through this time. This was not a moment of impulse. It was premeditated and cold-blooded. And before I go further, I do want to give a clear trigger warning. The details ahead involve the sexual and physical abuse of children. These are incredibly disturbing crimes, and they're difficult to talk about, but they matter. They matter because they help explain why this case has remained so haunting decades and decades later, and why the sentence this man received is one that many believe he absolutely deserves. What happened next is heartbreaking, and the story is not for the faint of heart. After abducting the two girls, Virgil drove them to a remote wooded area, a different wooded area. During the drive, he forced the 10-year-old girl to perform oral sex on him while he sexually assaulted her with his hands, all while still behind the wheel. Once he reached the secluded area, he led both girls deeper into the woods. He brought with him the rug and jar of lubricant he had packed in his car the day before. Clear signs of just how premeditated this crime truly was. When they were far enough in, he forced both girls to undress. Then, on the rug, he the 10-year-old. The assault was so violent that she suffered serious injuries. Her genital area was torn, and she began bleeding heavily. As she laid there in pain, Virgil told her to stay right where she was. He then took Lori and began walking her back toward his car, saying he'd return for the older girl. But Lori, just 8 years old, made a desperate, brave attempt to escape, just as her sister had described her. Lori tried to be courageous in the face of absolute terror. She ran. She tried to get away as best she could, but this monster caught her. Enraged that she had tried to get away, perhaps fearing another failed kidnapping like his earlier attempt, Virgil reacted with horrifying violence. He forced Lori's face into the shallow water of Nichole Creek and held her there until she drowned, until she took her last breaths. The medical examiner later testified that water, sand, and plant matter were found in Lori's lungs and stomach, indicating she was alive and conscious while being drowned, a process that would have taken several agonizing minutes. She also had bruises on her neck and back, consistent with Virgil using his knee to keep her submerged under the water. After killing Lori, Virgil returned to the 10-year-old girl and sexually assaulted her again. He then took her back to his car, locked her in his trunk, and drove off. But not long after, he got a flat tire. Instead of seeking help, he drove to another secluded area, let the girl out of the trunk, and assaulted her a third time. He then ordered her to stay put, promising he'd come back after fixing his tire. But this time, Lori's friend seized her chance. Injured but determined, she ran to a nearby gas station and cried out for help. The station's employees were horrified. The owner of the gas station later said this: "She was so scared and hurting so bad. Her dress was bloody. It's awful. It really shook everybody here up and made them real mad, too. A couple of them got in their cars to see if they could find him, but they didn't." Now, despite the trauma that she endured, this young girl was incredibly sharp and brave. She gave police a detailed description of her attacker and his car, a blue Plymouth Duster, which matched perfectly. That description led officers directly to Virgil Presnell, who they found in the parking lot of his apartment complex not too far from the crime scene, changing his flat tire. Now, at that point, Lori Smith was still considered missing. The 10-year-old girl didn't yet know that her friend had been brutally murdered. Virgil was arrested and initially denied everything, but under questioning, he eventually admitted to knowing exactly where Lori's body was. He led police to the first wooded location, where they found Lori Ann Smith's lifeless body. He later confessed in full to the kidnapping, the repeated sexual assaults, and to Lori's murder.
Did you feel ashamed?
Yes.
Are you afraid of dying?
Yes, I am.
Why?
Well, I'd rather live than to die. I'm just not the type that likes to get hurt or see other people get hurt. So therefore, I'd be afraid of time.
How do you reconcile your feeling that way with what happened to the girls?
Well, with the girls, with the oldest girl, I didn't feel that anything was wrong as long as the girl went along with it. But then when I seen it was hurting the girl, I had stopped everything. And as with the youngest girl, now, as far as drowning, that was an accident.
You maintain it was an accident?
Yes.
And during a search of his apartment, police also discovered a handgun and a lot of child pornography. Just one day after his arrest, Virgil Presnell Jr. was charged with kidnapping both Lori Smith and the 10-year-old girl, raping the older girl, and the malice murder of Lori. On May 26, 1976, a Cobb County grand jury formally indicted him for Lori's murder and the kidnappings. His trial was held at the Cobb County Superior Court. In a taped confession, Virgil admitted he pushed Lori down into the creek until she stopped moving, until she stopped breathing. He even told officers the older girl had a pornographic look and that he wanted to stay with her for a while, which was why he took her back to his car. But in court, he claimed he accidentally fell on top of Lori while pulling her to the creek bank before leaving the scene. And Lori's autopsy confirmed that she did die from drowning. A court-appointed psychiatrist testified that Virgil was still capable of knowing right from wrong, despite his own claims that the girls never protested, and thus he inferred he did nothing wrong. Virgil's mother testified she had given him very little sex education and described him as a slow learner. When asked if she knew he had a problem, she said, "Not like this, no. I didn't know he would attack little girls." During the trial, his mother and other relatives begged for his mercy, explaining his mind was warped by a childhood filled with incest and abuse. After about 2.5 hours of deliberation, on August 26, 1976, the jury found Virgil guilty of kidnapping and murdering Lori Smith, as well as kidnapping, injuring, and raping the older girl. The jury recommended the death penalty for Lori's murder, and the court sentenced 22-year-old Virgil Presnell Jr. to death. He also received 2 additional death sentences for the kidnapping and rape, plus 20 years for kidnapping Lori. Now, case closed, right? Given the horrific nature of the crime, the death sentence made sense. But as we'll soon learn, Virgil's sentence was appealed over and over, and nearly 50 years later, he remains on death row, still awaiting execution. Virgil's path through the justice system has been long and complicated, marked by numerous appeals and legal battles that have delayed his execution for decades. His original execution date was set for November 5th, 1976, just 3 days after Georgia's then governor, Jimmy Carter, was elected president of the United States. But obviously, that date never stuck. In 1978, the Georgia Supreme Court upheld his murder conviction and death sentence, but vacated his other 2 death sentences related to rape and kidnapping, ordering new sentencing on those charges. And later that year, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Virgil's last remaining death sentence on technical grounds and sent the case back to Georgia for review. Then, in early 1979, the Georgia Supreme Court reimposed the death penalty, citing aggravating factors that justified the sentence. His execution was then scheduled for June 15, 1981, but a federal judge granted him a stay pending appeal. Then, in 1988, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed his appeal against the death sentence. But then, in 1992, that same court overturned his death sentence and ordered a new sentencing trial, leading to his temporary removal from the death row by around 1997. Now let's fast forward to 1999. A second jury in Cobb County once again sentenced Virgil Presnell to death. Now, the key testimony during this retrial came from the surviving victim, that 10-year-old at the time, who recounted how this child murderer had forced both girls into his car and had raped her, the older girl, while the younger girl, Lori, watched. And since then, Virgil has continued to fight his sentence through a series of appeals. Now, the Georgia Supreme Court upheld his death sentence in 2001. Then, in 2013, a federal judge dismissed his appeal, and in 2020, the 11th Circuit Court rejected his second federal appeal. And then finally, in October 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his last remaining appeal. After decades and decades of legal battles and repeated appeals, many believed Virgil Presnell Jr. would finally face justice when his execution was scheduled for May 17, 2022. By then, Virgil was 68 years old. For his final meal, he requested 4 hamburgers, 4 orders of French fries, 2 vanilla milkshakes, 4 sodas, an 8-piece bucket of chicken, potato salad, and 2 pints of vanilla ice cream. But as things often went with this case, his execution didn't go as planned. On May 9, 2022, just days before the scheduled date, his lawyers filed another appeal. They argued that the state's decision to set his execution date violated an agreement that had effectively put executions on hold during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this agreement included conditions for resuming executions, such as the end of the pandemic emergency, normal visitation rights, and vaccine availability to the public. His attorney also cited that Virgil had significant cognitive impairments and an abusive childhood that may have played a role in his crimes nearly 50 years ago. The 51-page filing detailed severe brain damage caused by his mother's alleged heavy drinking during her pregnancy with him and described the sexual abuse and unstable environment that he grew up in. People can and will debate whether Mr. Presnell has served enough time, but nobody can dispute that he had served hard time, his lawyer wrote. His crime was the worst of the worst, and so has his sentence been. However, not everyone agreed that Virgil should avoid the death penalty. Former U.S. Representative Buddy Darden, who was Cobb County's district attorney at the time of Virgil's first trial, believed the sentence was justified. This was an outrageous crime, and there was never any real doubt about the evidence, he said. He also noted that life without parole wasn't an option during the original sentencing. If any case ever merited the death penalty, this was certainly one. Looking back, the circumstances were so horrible and heinous. Despite the decades on death row, Virgil's attorney pointed out that he had a spotless disciplinary history and has been a model prisoner. She described him as a defenseless, pathetic Peter Pan who is now living out his final years as a quiet, simple old man with a developmental disability. Executing him after all this time would serve no purpose and would bring more pain to more innocent people, she wrote in his clemency request. It would also be wholly contrary to the ideals of a civilized society to execute someone so profoundly disabled. Steve Schuster, a retiring Cobb County Superior Court judge who represented Virgil during his 1999 resentencing trial, called the original case probably the most horrific I've ever come across. And during the retrial, prosecutors had an even stronger case than they did in 1976. Many witnesses were still alive at the time, and they presented evidence from other cases where Virgil had molested young girls. Steve Schuster described Virgil as a soft-spoken man who enjoyed knitting and had become something of a historian for the stories shared by fellow death row inmates. In a custodial setting, he was not the monster he was outside, he said. As Virgil's former defense attorney, Steve Schuster said he wouldn't want to see his client executed. Yet, he admitted that for supporters of the death penalty, Virgil would have been a poster child for it. A clemency hearing was scheduled before the state parole board on May 14, 2022. Virgil's lawyers argued that he should be spared from the death penalty altogether, pointing out that he had significant cognitive impairments that likely contributed to his crimes, and that he had suffered abuse while in prison. They also emphasized that Virgil was deeply and profoundly sorry for what he did to Lori Smith and the other young victim back in 1976. A letter from Adele Grubbs, Virgil's trial lawyer, who later became a Superior Court judge, was quoted with saying this: Virgil was always clear that he did not mean to harm either girl. The effect on them of being kidnapped was beyond his understanding. He thought that they would have had an enjoyable time. His lawyers shared details about his troubled past. His mother was addicted to alcohol while pregnant with him, and his school records showed serious developmental disabilities. He grew up in what they described as an abusive and unstable family environment where sexual abuse was sadly endemic. And even at the time of his arrest, Virgil's cognitive limitations were very clear. While this all might sound unbelievable, because trust me it does, the clemency team argued it wasn't necessarily untrue. Their explanation, Virgil is profoundly brain damaged. His attorney wrote, Virgil likely suffers from fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, a condition that wasn't even recognized back when he was tried nearly 46 years ago. The application noted, we did not know better in 1976, but we knew better today. A just society does not execute the developmentally disabled. Over nearly 5 decades in prison, Virgil has served what the lawyers called hard time. The clemency request detailed how, especially during his early years on death row, he was routinely raped, beaten, and deprived. They say he endured winters without heat or hot water, and sometimes went years without setting a foot outside. And still, despite everything, like I said earlier, the condemned has been, quote, to have a spotless disciplinary history and is had to believe to be a model prisoner. And interestingly, a juror from Virgil's 1999 resentencing trial said that at least 6 jurors, including himself, would have chosen life without parole if it had been an option back then. Virgil's attorney summed it up this way: before society makes a man pay the ultimate price for a crime, it must determine if his culpability justifies the cost. In Virgil's case, it simply does not. Virgil Presnell is profoundly disabled. The clemency petition asked the parole board to postpone his execution by 90 days so they could review his application, and then to commute his sentence to life without parole. But on May 16, 2022, the day before his scheduled execution, the 5-member Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles rejected his clemency petition and allowed the execution to proceed. However, on that same day, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Shamerla Williams issued a temporary stay after hearing arguments related to the COVID-19 agreement. The next day, prison officials confirmed that Virgil's execution would not go forward as planned. And Virgil's lawyers didn't stop there. Only 2 days later, they filed another appeal, arguing that his cognitive impairments amounted to an intellectual disability that should bar the death penalty. But this time, the Georgia Supreme Court rejected this appeal. At the end of May 2022, Virgil's death warrant officially expired, meaning he was not executed. This deeply upset and disappointed the families of the victims, and of course it did. These people who expressed the pain and grief they've carried for more than 4 decades and said they had been hoping to finally see justice served. These families had also opposed clemency for Virgil earlier. Later that year, in September 2022, the Georgia Supreme Court began hearing Virgil's lawyer's lawsuit regarding the COVID-19 agreement. On December 20th, the court ruled unanimously that the state must continue following the agreement until all of its conditions are met, meaning Virgil and other inmates covered by it would not be executed during this period. And then, fast forwarding to February 2024, Georgia set an execution date for Willie James Pye, a convicted rapist and killer who wasn't covered by the COVID-19 agreement. Willie Pye was found guilty of abducting, raping, and murdering his ex-girlfriend in 1993 and was executed on March 20th, 2024, marking Georgia's first execution after a nearly 4-year pause caused by the pandemic. Nearly 5 decades after 8-year-old Lori Smith was kidnapped, raped, and murdered, her family is still waiting for justice, not just closure, but the punishment they believe her killer truly deserves. In October 2024, Lori's family, along with close friends, spoke out to the media for the very first time. After all these years, all these decades, despite all the years that have passed, their pain hasn't dulled, and neither has their desire to see Virgil being executed. They made it clear they do not want him to die of old age in a prison cell. They want the justice system to carry out what it decided decades ago: the death penalty. Then, in early 2025, the state of Georgia moved to lift the COVID-19 agreement that had put several executions, including Virgil's, on hold. State officials argued that the pandemic conditions no longer applied. Defense attorneys pushed back, saying the original conditions of the agreement had still not been fully met. If the court sides with the state, Virgil could once again face a scheduled execution date. That same month, Lori's family and childhood friends showed up to court, just like they've done countless and countless times before, to make their wishes known. A cousin shared how Lori's parents are still alive to this day, but now elderly, and live with the fear that they'll die before ever seeing justice served. One of Lori's childhood friends spoke firmly, saying there has never been any question about Virgil's guilt. In a rare and heartbreaking interview, Lori's sister Lisa spoke publicly in 2024, the first time since the murder nearly 50 years ago. She expressed a weariness that only time and injustice can carve. He was convicted in 1976 and got the death penalty. We did another trial in 1999, and he was issued the death penalty again. There has never been any doubt about his guilt. Lisa explained how years of legal delays and death penalty appeals have tormented their family.
It's something that we'll never be able to get rid of. And, you know, even at the age of 12, I thought I would be able to see him executed. And that is my goal in life, is to actually watch the execution. I do not want to see him die in jail of old age.
But as we all know, the wheels of the system move painfully slowly. Lisa said the soonest Virgil's case might return to Cobb County would be in a year, maybe more, and only then could things begin moving forward once again. The process has left us powerless, she said. Until it's out of Fulton County, there's nothing we can do. For the Smith family, this isn't just a court case. It's a lifetime of grief that never fades. In 2022, they were physically present at the prison in Jackson, expecting to witness Virgil's execution, only to leave empty-handed once again when it was postponed. And Lori's niece, Sarah, who never even got a chance to meet her aunt, opened up about how deeply this case has shaped her life. I'm almost 30, and this case has loomed over my entire life, she said. It's devastating to keep walking away without progress. It feels like we're stuck in place year after year. As of 2025, Virgil Presnell remains on death row at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison. He is currently the longest-serving death row inmate in the state, over 48 years behind bars. His continued presence there is a painful symbol of how drawn out and complicated the justice system can be, particularly when it comes to capital punishment. The Smith family says if everything aligns, if there are no more appeals, no more delays, they might finally see justice done in 2026. But they've been told that before. Today, Lori Smith would be in her late 50s, maybe a mother, a grandmother, living a life filled with memories and milestones. But that future was stolen from her in the most brutal way imaginable, when she was just 8 years old. Her childhood ended in terror, and her family has lived with that pain ever since. While there has never been any doubt about who committed this horrific crime, many believe that justice, true justice, still hasn't been served. Decades later, the Smith family are still waiting. And as the years pass, one heartbreaking question lingers. How long must a family wait to see justice for a little girl who never got the chance to grow up? Yes, the death penalty is one of the most controversial issues in our justice system today. People are divided. Some believe no crime justifies taking another life, while others see it as a necessary response to the most horrific acts. But in the case of Virgil Presnell Jr., regardless of where you stand on capital punishment, one truth is undeniable. His crime was one of the most brutal, premeditated, and heartbreaking acts imaginable. Virgil didn't act out of impulse or confusion. He had stalked that elementary school the day before, planning on abducting a child. He'd already attempted a similar attack in the past. This wasn't a moment of cognitive confusion. It was deliberate. He watched and waited, chose his target, and when Lori Smith simply happened to be walking home with her friend, she became collateral in a calculated nightmare. She was just only 8 years old. Her life was taken in the most violent way, and that violence has echoed through generations. Her family still lives with the pain, and not just them. The surviving victim and her family carry trauma that words can't touch. And the community forever changed. Parents stopped letting their children walk to school. Kids stopped playing outside without someone watching. Lori's death shattered a sense of safety that never returned. And decades later, her former classmates still remember her glowing smile, her playful spirit, a little girl full of life, gone in an instant. And yet, nearly 50 years later, justice remains elusive. While Virgil sits on death row at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, the longest-serving death row inmate in Georgia, Lori's loved ones continue to wait. They've endured retrials, appeals, legal loopholes, and temporary stays. And with every delay, their grief is reopened, their closure postponed. For them, life in prison is not justice. Watching their loved one's killer grow old behind bars is not justice. They've made it clear they want the sentence that was handed down not once, but twice, to finally be carried out. Now, some argue that death is too easy, that decades behind bars is a harsher punishment. Others believe that executing a man after so many years, especially one who claims mental impairment, is cruel and outdated. These are fair and deeply personal perspectives. But what Lori's family is begging for is not cruelty. It's simply resolution. It's certainty. They need answers about what will happen so they can grieve properly, fully, and without the looming weight of another legal battle. They don't want Virgil Presnell to simply slip away in a prison cell. They want acknowledgement from the system that what happened to Lori matters, that her life mattered, and that the full measure of justice promised to them nearly half a century ago will finally be delivered. Because while the legal rulings in Virgil Presnell's case have shifted over the decades, one thing has never changed. Lori Smith's life was stolen from her. Her story, her legacy, though, is not over. And her family shouldn't have to spend another day wondering if the justice system will ever keep its word. One thing is certain, while the justice system continues to waver on Virgil Presnell's fate, the memory of Lori Smith and the fight for the justice she was denied lives on.